Hello and welcome today to another talk from Conscious Isolation in collaboration with the University of East London. I welcome you all here today who's viewing. Now, many of you will have seen that it is Susie Olczak giving a chat to us today, a talk to us today, who many will know is also co-founder of Conscious Isolation, has done much brilliant work for the initiative from it starting up in the start of lockdown in 2020 to where we find ourselves today. So I'm just going to introduce Susie. Susie Olczak graduated with a BA Honours in Fine Arts Sculpture and Environmental Art from the Glasgow School of Art in 2010 and with an MA in Sculpture from the Royal College of Art in 2019. Susie Olczak is a multidisciplinary artist with a focus on sculpture. Her work focuses on the ideas of adaptations and asks the viewer to look again at the world. Her work explores geometry, pattern, and light while moving through nomadic spaces such as corridors, underpasses, and the walkways between buildings. Her work has been shown internationally in Berlin, Japan, and the United States. She has exhibited around the United Kingdom, attending residences in Finland, and has had her work commissioned by corporate clients located in Singapore. She has also been commissioned to produce public artworks by BBC Scotland, Charles Saatchi at the Big Freeze Festival, and the National Trust. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Susie. So thank you ever so much for giving us the honour of being able to listen to you and to see your practice and where you are taking your practice now with regards to your current works.
Thanks for inviting me to speak tonight, and thanks everyone for attending this talk this evening. I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll get going. So hopefully you should be able to see that. Someone can just let me know you can.
Yep, we've got it.
Brilliant, great. So yeah, I'm going to take you on a kind of journey tonight through my works, talking a little bit about some of the works before I went to Royal College, and then more recent works since my time studying at the Royal College, and then kind of end with where I am now, really, and a little bit about future projects going forward. So yeah, Sam said, I'm really interested in kind of experiences of urban space, and I often kind of get a lot of inspiration from things I see out in the world. I kind of most often in cities and towns, but kind of increasingly also in the natural world. And I'm really interested in the kind of way that the natural world is kind of always creeping back in to even the most urban of spaces. So this is just a kind of example of something out in the world. It's in the river on the canal side in North London. It's near where my old studio was, and just an example of kind of the kind of structure that really inspires how I think and how I kind of make my work. So yeah, this is a kind of core 10 structure in an underpass, and as Sam said in the intro, I'm really interested in kind of transitory spaces and the spaces that we move through, and I'm kind of often thinking about the way that as people, as humans, we're constantly kind of thinking about how we kind of, I feel like our cities around us are kind of this constant human kind of stacking and slotting and tying of materials. So I'm very interested in kind of ideas of the contingent and what like human kind of abilities to kind of build in a quite a kind of slightly haphazard, but also a kind of really honest and kind of really genuine way. So yeah, so I'm just going to show you a few quite early works. So this is really soon after graduating from my undergrad at the Glasgow School of Art. I got a commission to work on a piece of work for the Saatchi art trail at the Big Chill Festival in Hereford, or just outside Hereford. And the curator from Saatchi Gallery at the time had seen my work in Glasgow and was interested in asking me to kind of translate this work I'd made inside into an outdoor space. So it kind of led on to quite a lot of commissions in my early kind of career when I first graduated, working with light and working with kind of sight, and also thinking about how we can use light and structure in sculptures and installations to think about how we kind of move around space and how we perceive the space around us. So this was very much around kind of color theory and using different colored lighting to kind of push and pull the space in a different way and change the perspective of again a kind of transitory space in a kind of forest area of the festival. And then that led on to working quite a lot in neon. I kind of still work in neon from time to time, but maybe a little bit less than I did before the Royal College. This piece of work was called Temple, and it was very much inspired by I spent some time living in Japan, in Kyoto, on my undergrad, and I was really interested in the kind of Japanese construction techniques where they build quite a lot of their temples and kind of architectural structures without using any kind of mechanical fixings. So I wanted this piece to kind of represent that. So quite a lot of the piece is kind of slot together. It's a kind of flat pack sculpture, gets slotted together, and then the base of the structure kind of the pieces kind of fall on top of each other. And the use of the reflection kind of completes the triangle only when the viewer is at a certain position. So it kind of encourages this kind of I hope it encourages the viewer to be kind of really present in front of the work, and it kind of, I hope as well, has a kind of slightly spiritual feeling to it, and also kind of takes a lot of inspiration from Gestalt psychology and this idea that our brains are able to kind of complete the whole, even when we're given kind of only certain components. And that's another kind of example of this. This piece was commissioned by Future City for a one-day event at the Institute of Astronomy in Cambridge. And again, another example of where I'm kind of asking the viewer to walk around a series of structures and kind of very much think about their engagement with the space around. And this piece was very much kind of site specific for this space, and I was kind of interested in the kind of history within the Institute of Astronomy, obviously, of kind of looking out into space and really kind of being really focused on kind of viewfinding viewpoints, and kind of also trying to make a work that mirrored the structure in the space behind, and again changed as the viewer walked around it. And that kind of led on to a number of pieces where I was experimenting with neon and also sensors, and kind of thinking not only about what would happen if the viewer kind of walks around pieces of work and then their perception of that work is altered, but what would happen if I also had the viewer kind of, if I created works where the viewer was able to actually interact with it some way and kind of have an effect on the work itself. So this was a series of four structures that had a sensor on one side that was triggered by a person walking past, and it would trigger the different lights on each structure, which kind of gives an effect of the structure seems like it's rolling, and then the lights kind of gradually lose momentum and then get triggered again. So I was going to include videos, but I always know that videos on talks and when screen sharings don't often work that well. So especially over the internet. So I've got videos on my website if anyone's interested in having a look, and I'm really happy to kind of send an email with videos if anyone drops me a line at any point. And this led on to a number of larger scale site specific commissions I was working on in Cambridge and also in London for the National Trust. This was a commission that I did in collaboration with Ross Ashton, who's an artist who works a lot with projection. And we were commissioned to create a work for this building in Cambridge, which is called Senate House, and it's right next to Caius College, which is the college where Venn studied. And so we thought it'd be kind of really interesting to. We both like are really kind of interested in geometry, and so we thought it'd be really great to think about making the buildings into a Venn diagram. So the kind of sacred geometry gets gradually drawn through our animation on the building, and the geometry kind of builds up over time and then disappears, and then the drawing begins again. And again, it was a really nice piece of work in terms of watching the way that people stopped on their kind of way through the city, got off their bike, and just spent some time with the space and with the building, and kind of gave it more time than they might normally have given it on their kind of way through the city. And yeah, I spent quite a lot of time outside, just kind of observing how people engaged with this work, and I think it worked well in that sense of, again, a slightly kind of spiritual or kind of slightly kind of reverent aspect to it. And then this piece is called Reflect, and I worked on this piece in collaboration with Sue Shepherd. I'm going to talk about quite a few collaborations over the course of this presentation. I really enjoy collaborating. I think it's a really beneficial way of working, and my collaboration with Sue Shepherd has been incredibly beneficial to my practice and my thinking, and she's just been so supportive all the way through my career. So I met Sue when I was living in Cambridge just before the Royal College, and she had a lot of experience working with neon, so she kind of taught me a lot about using light, and we got this commission to work on a project as part of an arts festival called Art Language Location. And we wanted to create this work that, again, kind of made people stop and think a little bit more, and kind of look at the world in a way that they might not normally take the time to do, again, in a kind of a point in the city where people normally are just kind of passing over a bridge and not really stopping to look very often. So yeah, we created the word reflect and neon backwards, and then kind of installed it on the riverside with the idea that then the reflection creates the word forward. So quite a simple piece in its concept, but quite tricky in terms of the production of it. And it was my first kind of experience of using neon outside in this way, in terms of leaving it for kind of 6 months outside as a commission, and also definitely my first experience of trying to hang a sculpture right over a river. It's kind of quite tricky in terms of getting scaffolding up, but yeah, I think a really beneficial project to have worked on. And then yeah, I'm kind of now into the Royal College. I wanted to kind of whiz through to get to that point, and I can kind of talk about more recent projects a little bit too. And I was lucky at the Royal College to receive a travel grant to go to Iceland, and at this point water had started to become a really important material for me. Increasingly I kind of had felt that I'd looked at light a lot, and I was really kind of done a lot of research into experiences of light and how light affects our experiences of the spaces around us. And then increasingly I started to think a lot about water, So I applied for this funding in my first year at the Royal College, and then was lucky enough to go to Iceland on a solo research trip for 10 days in the summer in between my first and second year. And I was really interested in, well, the kind of research was around going to different sites around Iceland, and particularly focusing on either water or ice at those sites. So I went around and saw a lot of the waterfalls, climbed an active volcano, which was really cool. And also then went to this lagoon in the south of Iceland. And I was really kind of, I guess, really, yeah, it was a really powerful place to visit. I was really kind of, yeah, touched by it as a place, and also really fascinated by the way that, so the kind of inland glacier is melting as it is as they are around the world. And I watched the glacier kind of fragments of the ice in the lagoon, and then walked down to, they kind of break up and drift down to the sea, and then drift back onto the shore. And then I was really kind of really fascinated watching. I spent a long time at the beach watching how people interacted with it, and it was quite interesting. Some people kind of spent a lot of time just kind of watching these fragments of ice, and then other people were kind of getting changed into ball gowns and standing on top of the ice in the sea to take selfies. And I kind of find this the way that the digital exacerbates issues around climate change, or the kind of the conversation that you know, there's this idea that we as people can kind of be wanting to take selfies in front of our demise of the kind of demise of our own world is really quite problematic. And when I got back to Royal College, I wanted to make a piece of work that both kind of honoured the sadness and the power behind this ice melting, but also wanted to kind of in some ways celebrate the ice as a material, and what it means for our world. So when I got back into the second year, I worked on a project in the glass department. It was the first time I'd really used cast glass. I'd used glass a lot before in sheet material, and also as neon, but never really cast it. So I was able to work on this project, which involved creating a computer kind of simulation, like a CAD file of glass, of ice, and then putting it through a kind of computer controlled milling machine, and then making a hand mold from that, and then making that into the glass mold, and then many hours of polishing it on the glass machine. So yeah, kind of, I think a really interesting piece for me in terms of learning a new process, and also starting to really kind of formulate ideas that I think about a lot in my work to this day, really. And then I was also lucky to go on a trip to the Palais de Tokyo at the Royal College, and we spent a week working as part of the Saraceno Aeroscene project that was happening at the time. A group of students and I kind of we were part of the sustainability laboratory at the Royal College, a kind of sustainability society, and we spent a week making work and using the Saraceno space as our kind of research base. And I wanted to create a work there that really represented this journey that I'd been on kind of through the elements. So I made this projection work that started with light and then moved onto water, and then to kind of reflect the relationship with the Saraceno space, I then moved also to air as well. And this was a large scale projection work with sound. So I had sound recordings from water, and also sound recordings from the air as well. And I think this idea of journeys has become, again, kind of increasingly more important, and especially this idea of kind of journeys through the elements is something I kind of keep coming back to all the time throughout my practice. And that Palais de Tokyo project was, again, really kind of formative in a lot of my thinking to this day. And then when I got back to the Royal College before our degree show, I started working a lot on a kind of new body of sculptural works, and I was kind of really keen to think more sustainably about the way I create work, and also think quite a lot about how I could start reusing materials in different ways. And I was thinking a lot of the time about this kind of role of the digital, and the way that the digital world kind of can be quite disorientating, and also how in some ways it's interesting that we can kind of get lost in the digital world, and what that means in terms of helping us to kind of find our way again. And also kind of, just this the way that the digital world kind of fragments and pixelates the world around us. And I was kind of thinking a lot about the parallels between the way that we navigate urban space and the way that we navigate through digital, using kind of grid systems. So I started making these works that used up a lot of different materials in my studio, and really kind of started to kind of use parts of different processes. So at the time, I was spending a lot of time in the print room, creating new prints, and also spending a lot of time learning different casting techniques in the workshop. So I wanted to kind of make these works that reflected that, and that kind of become like architectural models for the future, or kind of, you could imagine them being scaled up into larger scale public artworks, or also kind of potentially be the size of buildings. And I wanted the scale to be really ambiguous. So the acetate you can see here is all from leftover from the printmaking process, the acetate that's used to expose screens. And then there's kind of bits of 3D print trials in here, and kind of bits from the casting workshop with kind of silicone dripping onto it. And this really led on to the body of work that I ended up showing at the Royal College for my final show. And again, it's kind of got this kind of fusion between the urban and the natural world, and then also this idea of the kind of digital coming in, and kind of a fusion of different processes, and kind of they kind of sit somewhere. They're obviously sculptural works, but they reference printmaking and painting and photography as well. And as I said earlier, architecture is really inspiring for me, but in particular, I'm really interested in examples of architecture that aren't really traditional or kind of typical, or they kind of have this slightly potentially quite playful or utopian kind of feel to them. So this is an example of a building that I saw a few years ago in Spain, in kind of in between Valencia and Alicante, and it's an example of a social housing complex in Spain. And I just really was really drawn to this, because it feels so, to me, it feels so utopian, and I really wanted to convey a kind of essence of that in the pieces that I was making at the Royal College, and to kind of think about these kind of works as being kind of playful examples of what our worlds might be able to look like. So that led on to the rest of the works that I showed as part of my final show for the Royal College. I used a lot of kind of this millennial pink, and kind of brought in like leftovers of packaging, and kind of use of tape and use of paint, kind of layering to, again, to kind of playfully question what our world might look like. And yeah, this kind of use of packaging has come out of this kind of desire, I guess, to want to be more sustainable with my practice, and to think about kind of what, yeah, like not having a kind of hierarchy of materials in a way that I used to. I used to work a lot with kind of quite expensive materials that were very fine, or like using metal and glass. It's very polished, it's very finished. And at the Royal College, I became much more interested in using materials that wouldn't necessarily normally be considered as sculptural materials. And this is just an example of the works together at that show. And again, I kind of thought quite carefully about how the viewer would walk around them and kind of engage with them, and maybe kind of start to see one sculpture through a layer of the other, to kind of create this world that they kind of enter into and move around and kind of engage with in quite a kind of playful way. And then that really led on to just before COVID. So just before COVID hit, I started working a lot more with collage, and I was lucky to do a residency at Standpoint Gallery that came out of my degree show at the Royal College, with two other artists, Kat Robertson and Veronica Nikirch, and we spent a month in Standpoint and were able to use all of their facilities, which was a really great experience. And we were able to use their ceramic studios, and also we got advice from the resident printmakers. So during that residency, I spent a lot of time making new ceramic works, and then also working on some new two-dimensional works, and beginning to kind of explore printmaking further than I kind of had at the Royal College, which was really beneficial, because it really meant that when COVID hit and I couldn't access my studio, I had this kind of two-dimensional practice that I could start really kind of developing further. So this is an example of the print works that I made at Standpoint for the show. We had a show at the end of the residency, and I made a series of new ceramics works, as I said, and this series of print works, and also another sculpture. And then, yeah, so I began during then lockdown hit. I couldn't access my studio without kind of breaking the lockdown rules, so I didn't. I just kind of stayed at home, and we set up conscious isolation, and then I turned my living room floor and kitchen floor into kind of a printmaking studio, and started making these collages using print, and again kind of thinking about how I could utilize different processes. So I had quite a lot of leftover kind of scrap material that I started to print onto and cut out and create these collage works from. And then again, I'm still kind of at home at this point. We're still in deepest lockdown, and I started to think about what kind of making maquettes for what these works could then be like on a kind of either a larger scale, or starting to think about how they could then become three-dimensional again. So I spent quite a lot of time during the first lockdown kind of creating these models, and very much thinking about how they could kind of combine both print and also three-dimensional form in one. And then also kind of thinking about scaling up. So I made some kind of quite quick and quite rough and ready maquettes just in the flat and on the balcony. I was lucky enough to have a little bit of outdoor space, so I started to kind of expand and think about going kind of engaging with the world around and the architecture behind as well. So these kind of still at the stage now where I'm trying to now develop these into larger scale works. But it's, again, lockdown was kind of quite formative in terms of thinking about kind of just pushing my work further, really. And then also during lockdown, I set up another initiative with another artist called Ian Walter. And we spent a lot of time talking about ideas around kind of I guess it's ideas that came out of the Aeroscene workshop as well, about obviously the importance of air, but also the increasing kind of politicization of our airspace. I'd been reading a lot of articles around the kind of like Amazon trying to take over the top section of the bottom section of the airspace above buildings, so that they can kind of control dominate and kind of capitalize on the airspace. And a little bit like water, there's obviously like a kind of really long-standing history of it being contentious and fought over. And Ian and I, through conversation, we talked a lot about what it might mean to take back kind of ownership of some of the airspace, and to think about a kind of playful artistic response to the kind of to kind of counteract some of what's happening in our cities and in our urban space. So we set up this online gallery called Hang On Gallery, and it's a kind of, we've invited artists to respond to what it might mean to show work hanging from a crane in our spaces, and we're kind of slowly developing it. So we built the 8-foot crane on the right hand side, and we've kind of taken it around and asked artists to respond to it in different ways. So this was actually a group piece of work that was created by a group of my students at the University of Gloucestershire last year. They spent a day kind of hanging lots of different things from our crane, and the intention is eventually we would love to take over a full-size construction crane for a day or a week or a month, or even just kind of an evening, to hang sculpture works. And we hope we could hang a kind of group show or a solo show from the crane. And then eventually it would be amazing to take over a number of cranes within a city, and so people would come across these artworks in unexpected public space. And then this is kind of back to kind of last summer, so I was finally able to access my studio again a little bit in the break between the two lockdowns, and I started to kind of continue to make some sculptural works again. They're kind of propositional works for larger public works. They're kind of works in their own right, but the intention is that they could be scaled up and become very large public works. And with this one, I was really kind of, again, thinking quite a lot about utopian ideas, and thinking about how in some ways it was kind of quite ironic that we were suddenly being sold these kind of holidays abroad during the pandemic, even though it potentially was questionable whether it was safe or not. So I wanted to make this work that kind of represented this, had this kind of like holiday kind of trip to the Caribbean type feel, but also kind of reflected the kind of really tacky drinking straws you get sometimes in the cocktails with the kind of umbrellas. And just kind of really thinking about a work that could hopefully playfully question some of what we're sold as people in society, as kind of being these utopian ideals. and then just kind of what does that mean for our world, really. And then became increasingly interested during COVID in the use of tape. Again, it was kind of something that was put up everywhere around our cities to kind of control us in a way, and to kind of give us the illusion that it was keeping us safe, but it was a kind of control mechanism. And I've always been kind of really drawn to the tape that, like, if you're walking through the underground in London, you see lots of bits of tape that is just kind of, again, very kind of contingent, and also it's kind of our human way of adapting. So sometimes you'll see a kind of broken bit of the wall, and they've just put some hazard tape over the top. And then I've also always been really drawn to the traces of kind of advertising in urban space, that there's so many kind of layers of torn posters, or kind of traces of what was once advertising or was once kind of human activity. So this is a photo that I took last summer again in London. And then I was back in the studio, and I kind of wanted to make the biggest work I could make using tape, and kind of spray paint and bits of kind of salvaged material. So this is a stool that I found discarded outside the studio. And I really wanted to make this work that it's called Escaping the Confines. And this work that kind of is trying to break through from all that restraint and the tape and the control, and again kind of playfully question some of the ideas that we'd been made to kind of become accustomed to, I guess, during the pandemic. And I was really keen to find a base for it, or kind of part of the structure that was really domestic. So the stool was kind of perfect. It was kind of escaping the confines of our domesticity, really. And then that led on to kind of more recently, I've been quite experimental again in the studio, and kind of thinking about what would happen if I started to bring back the neon into some of the newer work that I've been working on with the kind of mixed media and the tape. And I wanted to make this work, which again, it's kind of got references back to my time in Japan, and the cherry blossom, and the way that Japanese culture really honors the changing of the season. They'll kind of spend time looking at the kind of that when the seasons change, they'll really kind of make time to go and look and observe that change of season, and they moon gaze, and they kind of go and watch the leaves changing in different natural spaces. So I wanted to make a work that sits somewhere between a weeping willow, a cherry blossom tree, and also has a kind of sense of it kind of could be a bit of street signage, or a street light, and also a bit kind of sweet like. So it's kind of enticing us towards it. But again, it's kind of slightly utopian, and also it's got a slightly kind of weird, awkward nature to it. It doesn't kind of sit quite right when you go up towards it. And then also last summer, I was lucky enough to be accepted onto a residency at Hesticum in Somerset, a gallery in Somerset. It was part of the Ingram collection purchase prize, and I went down to spend some time on the residency in Hesticum, and I was really drawn to. They have a waterfall in the gardens of Hesticum, and I was really drawn to a lot of the paintings. There's a lot of paintings that are like this one by Bamfield, and that's kind of led on to a series of works and 2 shows that I'm going to talk to you about now, and then I think I'm nearing the end. So I made a series of 4 new collage works for the show at Hesticum last year, which is a show called Landscape Portrait Now and Then, and I created these new collage works, partly using cyanotypes that I'd made during my time in the garden. I kind of made cyanotypes out in the space and then exposed them with the sunlight and then put them into the water that was coming from that waterfall as a source. And then also used photographs that I'd made in the gardens themselves, and then made a series of prints back in the studio as well, and kind of created these collages that combined all of them. And they used the garden landscape design as a kind of starting point for them, and I wanted them to kind of fragment and be somewhere kind of between something quite microscopic or cellular or kind of crystalline, but then also have elements of the one on the right is kind of looks quite like a telescope, and then the one on the right and the one next to it kind of has a sense of that telescope kind of morphing into a flower or a natural form. And then recent works, I've been doing a couple more projection works. I started one other initiative. It's an initiative called Plus One, with a group of artists. The idea being that we host exhibitions in domestic spaces, another idea that kind of came out of lockdown, and we invite the artists the kind of core artists invite a plus one who they don't know, who they know their work through social media or through the internet, who they don't know, and who ideally comes from an underrepresented group. And we just had the first iteration of plus one quite recently, and I created this projection work for that show. I wanted to project in the bathroom, and I projected water footage that I'd crowdsourced during COVID. So I kind of asked people from all around the world to film and send me their film footage. And then we also did a number of film kind of live Zoom film screenings where we Zoomed each other, and I wasn't near the sea at all, so I was really missing being connected by water. So they filmed footage and kind of back into my Zoom screen, and I recorded it. So I created this projection work based on all of that footage, and showed it recently in London. And then just another couple of kind of recent things I've been doing. We also did a show. Sam and I curated a show at the University of East London called 50/50, which I guess has quite nice similarities to plus one in a way. So it was 50% artists who have spoken previously on conscious isolation, and then 50% artists who have who are part of the University of East London. So again, these kind of ideas of inviting other artists and making connections has kind of really been quite key to my practice alongside kind of collaborative working. And I created another series of 4 collages for that show, which you can see on the right here. And then finally, just last week, I opened it was the opening of the second show at Hesticum took place, and I created a new projection work for Hesticum. It was kind of based around the same waterfall, which is actually not natural. It's a man-made waterfall. So I was really surprised when I found this out, and I'm kind of really thinking quite a lot at the moment about what is natural in our natural world. A lot of what we think is natural isn't. It is often man-made, and so I wanted to create this work that again kind of collages footage from around the gardens and layers, and it's kind of an extension of the projection work I made for the Palais de Tokyo, where I was going through that elemental journey from light through to water. This one kind of takes the next steps. It kind of continues with air, and then continues with water, and then brings in plants into the footage. And in with the waterfall in Hesticombe, there's this amazing photograph in the archives of the gallery that shows a group of people waiting for the waterfall to be turned back on. And I just really liked this idea of this kind of group of spectators waiting for what they think, or maybe they once thought was natural, to kind of be switched back on again. So this projection work is very much based around that idea of kind of waiting for nature to be turned back on. So at points it kind of it flickers and it goes blank, kind of turns back on again. And again, it kind of, I hope it kind of fuses between ideas of the kind of digital and the natural, because it has a lot of kind of pixelations and perforations within the footage as well. And that kind of leads me on to two slides about future projects. So I'm going to be going on a residency next summer to Panama to spend 3 weeks in the desert, and I'm going to be working collaboratively with another artist called Emma Elliott to create a new film work based on the experience of working in the sorry, I think I said desert, in the tropics, in the rainforest. So I'm going to be working with her again, kind of continuing this research into plants, and we'll be working very closely alongside Indigenous community there. So I think it'll be really interesting to kind of observe their way of life and hopefully share kind of some knowledge about plants and about forests and rainforests with them. And then I'm also going to be creating a new work for Hesticombe to go outside into the garden. So this is kind of an initial maquette for the piece of work that I'm hopefully going to be kind of starting in the new year. Again, incorporating print and hopefully quite a kind of playful sculptural work that, again, I'm hoping will kind of encourage people to walk up to it, to engage, to spend time with it, and kind of move around it in the space. And I'm hoping to build this as sustainably as possible as well. So I'm hoping to use kind of sustainably sourced wood, and I've recycled plastic and kind of print onto that. So be kind of in a really interesting next step to think about how I can kind of make some of the pieces like I showed you earlier that were kind of using card and tape a bit more kind of permanent and larger scale, and see how they kind of exist out in the world amongst the natural world. And then I think that is my last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing and maybe Sam is going to come back. No.
Hey Susie.
Hiya.
Thank you so much for that talk. It was great.
Yeah.
Really interesting, because you know how, I suppose, although I know you so terribly well, and obviously we're in constant conversation with one another, it's so rare, isn't it, to actually get a real insight into one's practice properly. And I always find it fascinating. A little bit like, you know, Juan last week, because you said, you know, shoot the shit in the pub or whatever, but never get down to the nitty gritty of what one's practice is truly about. I mean,
Yes.
you do and you don't, but there's so much depth to it, so many layers, and yeah, no, it's fascinating. I'm blown away by it. I think it's great. Really
I'll
do.
be inviting you next.
Indeed.
You won't be escaping.
So some questions I'd like to put to you. Obviously, knowing you as well as I do, and that you're a tutor and a keen educator, I was wondering how important it is to you with regards to the documentation of your work, seeing that you are a very process-led artist. I think it's like a key conversation, isn't it, especially in education, but that it is very valued also with regards to that of the professional studio in which you inhabit yourself.
So what did you say? Let me just get the question right. So you're asking what, how important documentation is.
Yeah,
What's,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
documenting your process and your profile.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's important on a kind of, I guess, a more self-indulgent sense of just, for me, it's like it's a sketchbook. It's the way I think. I do draw, but I don't necessarily draw to think rather than draw to to kind of for works in their own rights. But photographs are the way I kind of really think through ideas. So I will always be documenting stuff for my own kind of just to kind of as a sketchbook really to look back onto. And then in terms of actual documentation of the work, I think it's really hard to document some works, like especially works that involve light. So it took a long time, and was something actually really useful that we were given at Glasgow was a kind of lesson in documenting our work, which I'm not sure all art schools do. I mean, I know we do it with our students here, but it's so important, and really going into the importance of all the different kinds of shots you might need to get. And then I quite often book out, so some of this kind of more studio shots I kind of would rather make maybe one less work a year and book out a professional studio twice a year in order to get really good photographs, because obviously it's nice to get shots with with the background and the kind of gallery context shots, but it's also, I think, really good to get those clean kind of studio shots. So I spend a lot of time photographing, and then photography obviously comes back into my work, so it's kind of, it has another benefit as well. Like the better I get at photography, the more I think about it and the more I kind of bring it into the physical works themselves. So
Sure.
yeah, for any students out there, get good with the camera. So it's so useful. And then then you also don't have to pay photographers all the time. Like it's good when you can afford it, to pay someone to come and document your work, and obviously they see it in a different perspective, but it gets really expensive to do it all the time. So the more you can do yourself, the better. Sorry, photographers out there.
It's just good practice, isn't it? I suppose it really is.
And if you think about it in a different way, when you start documenting your work, I start framing it in a different way. And like when I was documenting the 50/50 show the other day, I thought about that show more because of spending that time. Obviously, we thought about the show loads. We curated it, we put it on, we installed it, we were there for the opening. But actually, the documentation of it made me think about those connections between the works and the works themselves in a way that I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't spent that time photographing it.
I mean, that's what I was actually going to go on to, was obviously that you documented the 50/50 show and the photos in which you sent over to me. I thought they were excellent, to be honest with you. It's different, isn't it, when you're a sculptor, you envisage space differently with regards to that sort of objects and object intervention. And I think that, often sort of professional photographers maybe are not so attuned to how one would otherwise think about how to photograph a sculpture or even an installation or whatever it might be,
Yeah, so I think it's so valuable speaking to them as well and getting their input, and obviously, getting them involved. But it's kind of that alongside doing it yourself. And photography in terms of, when it's not COVID, I travel as much as I can, and save up to go on residencies or to go on research trips, or kind of just kind of try to get out in the world as much as possible. And photography obviously becomes a really valuable way of documenting those experiences, and leads on to so much future work. Like I feel like the archive I've got from the week I spent in Hesticum in terms of photographs of the landscape and the garden and details of things from the archive is going to kind of feed my work for quite a long time. So the more photographs you can get, the more material you've got really to work with.
I mean, sure. I mean, so with your collages, how are they produced?
So they're a combination of I use screen prints and monoprints, and photographs of particular locations. So the ones I used that came out of the experience of Standpoint were all taken in the vicinity of Standpoint, so all around Hoxton. The ones at Hesticombe were all taken at Hesticombe. So a combination of photographs that I've taken at different sites. Sometimes use bits of tape as well, and then sometimes also sections of it are hand painted, and kind of cut them, make stuff. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, cut them up again, make them into new material. So it's like the sculptures. I keep using the same material again and again until it's resolved, and then try and use up the excess material in other works.
So it sort of comes into your ethos of the reclaimed again.
Yeah. But reclaiming from my own processes, as much as reclaiming from things I found I find like out and about, in terms of like the stool, for example. It's just something someone else has disused stool or kind of disregarded.
Which you find so readily in sort of massive metropolis like London, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good.
I suppose that's pardon me, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just saying it's good to waste not, want not, as everyone's grands would say, I think.
I suppose that takes me on to obviously you're very conscious of the environment, and I suppose how will you be sort of systematically and purposefully putting that into the procreation of your future practice?
I'd really like to. I know digital works that aren't necessarily completely sustainable, and I know me saying I'm going to Panama, I am planning on, like you do, Sam, like offsetting the carbon from that trip, and I'm definitely conscious of that. But I want to work quite a lot digitally. I want to really develop the installations and the projection work more, because although it obviously is using electricity, it isn't using so many kind of resources in terms of and producing more, and then just kind of be more conscious of I guess the way I work now since the Royal College. I kind of work through a lot of ideas and these kind of maquettes at a smaller scale, and using materials that are kind of often I either have them in the studio or had them in the studio already, like the tape or stuff that's kind of reusing packaging and things like that, and then trying to make the works that are more using things like metal and wood less often, but when they've definitely got a like permanent home, and then with those trying to really think about being quite careful with the choices. So using scrap material or using sustainably sourced material or kind of recycled material. I don't know what the answer is. I don't it's hard because you don't want to kind of stifle creativity, but also I don't want to constantly be producing stuff that just keeps producing, like using resources and doesn't end up having a permanent home. So where possible, either bringing stuff back into future works and reusing within the works themselves, or being quite tactical about when things are more permanent.
Sounds healthy, actually. It seems like there's devices of elimination going on continuously, which I think is really, really important, especially when you speak about, the whole kind of practical side of one's practice with regards to that of the process and the process-led practice, from drawings to maquettes to that of what it turns into being on the large scale. And that purposeful way of making this educated evaluation of elimination, I think, is really important, especially with regards to that sculpture. And not being
really fun to destroy work from time to time, then build it into something else. When you're fed up with a piece of work because you've been carting it around for ages, and you just it's taking up loads of room in the studio, and you're just saying, actually, I'm going to document it really well. I'm going to cut it up, and I'm going to make it into something new. It's great.
I like it. And this is kind of maybe a bit of a strange question, but could you ever see any of your works being inhabited?
Yeah, I've never really thought about. Well, yeah.
It's a strange question because I'm not talking like from an architectural perspective. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like when I'm looking at your works, I feel like sort of structurally they would have enough integrity structural integrity, to be
Yeah.
able to like maybe function in a manner which maybe you would look at it as being more so architecturally. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's definitely something that I got some feedback recently, and I'm yet to be able to do it in terms
Oh,
of.
I think we.
Oh, still there? You lost me. Oh, there. Can you hear me, Sam? Oh, you there?
Sorry, my internet froze on this end. Apologies.
We're talking about inhabiting. Yeah, I mean, it'd be amazing to. And got some feedback recently about how it'd be great to show more documentation with people interacting with the work, and I need to
Mm.
do that more. I'd also really like to make works with plants inhabiting them, make some works for live plants at some point. That's definitely something. So not people inhabiting them, but I also think the more we think about our world as us and the natural world as kind of equal rather than having this human centered world, the better, really. So
Sure.
making some works for the natural world itself rather than for us as humans would be quite fun, I think, too.
I think that's really good. It sort of gives me visions. You know those natural bridges that they have developed over in places like Canada, for instance. So the wildlife can, instead of being run over or hit or anything like that, there by the vehicles. I mean, they can sort of cross over these sort of man-made, natural-ish structures.
Yeah, it sounds great. I think I've got quite hippie tendencies in that sense. Like the
That's
spiritual
fantastic.
nature and then the non-human centered aspect. Yeah.
Well, no, thank you, Susie. I think that was a really, really great in-depth talk about your practice, and I mean, it's always fascinating to hear your contemporaries speak about their work in such depth and with such clarity. So thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much for inviting me, and yeah,
Yeah,
uh, see you soon. Thanks
yeah.
everyone for coming.
See you soon.
Bye.
Everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.